Chapter 51. The Truth. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. She's at the police station. Cheng Wan took his coat and walked out the door, looking down at the number on his mobile phone. Lu Xiaoying stopped smiling after hearing this and was stunned as well. He shot up straight. Police station. Lu Xiaoying naturally knew that the her that Cheng Wan was talking about was Qin Ran. He put down his chopsticks and got up. Why is she in there? Cheng Wan didn't know the situation, so he only motioned for him to get the car key. I asked Jiang Hui to come. Cheng Mu followed behind them expressionlessly. He knew who Jiang Hui was. He was Jiang Dongye's uncle. He had heard before that Jiang Hui had been assigned to some third-tier city by old Master Jiang. It turned out to be in Yuncheng. But was it really necessary to call him here? Such a tiny matter like a fight among high school students actually required Jiang Hui to come here and use a sledgehammer on a nut. A restaurant box in the middle. They're all at first middle school, why didn't they bring Ran along? Lin Chi smiled. I heard her mother say that she is very popular in school. Upset, the cup in Qin Yu's hand touched the edge of the table. Your mother said she had matters to attend to, but why is she so late? Lin Chi heard the sound of the cup and looked over to ask. He waited for a while and didn't see Ning Qin coming back. Qin Yu held her chopsticks, lowered her eyes and bit her lip. She should be at the police station. Police station. Lin Chi froze and subconsciously dropped the menu. Lin Wan also looked up. My sister just fought with someone at school and was taken to the police station by the police. I'm afraid that something happened to them. Qin Yu sighed. Lin Chi stood up and frowned. Nothing will happen. I'll go. Before he finished speaking and stood up, Lin Jinxian, who had just come in, got up and wiped his hands with a paper towel. Dad, you can eat with Aunt first. I'll go to the police station. Lin Jinxian was also a respectable man in Yuncheng. His connections weren't worse than his father's. Lin Chi hesitated and then nodded. Okay, then you go and see. Call me if something happens. Qin Yu looked at Lin Jinxuan's back. She had never seen Lin Jinxian so concerned before. Dad, I'm a bit worried about my mother and sister. Let me go with my brother. Be careful. Lin Chi thought for a while but did not refuse. The police station. Hearing Grandma Su's words, Ning Qin panicked. Once those people were really involved, could she cope with it? She asked the officer to take her to see Qin Ran. Her child was injured badly by your daughter. When we arrived, his arms were already soft and his injury appraisal has yet to come out. Officer Li glanced at Ning Qin. If they investigate it, she won't be able to get away with less than 2 years of jail. Ning Qin opened the door uneasily. Qin Ran had one hand on the table and the other supporting her chin. Her eyes were closed. When she heard the voice, she opened her eyes slightly. When she saw who it was, she changed her posture anxiously. Why are you here? She hadn't told them Ning Qin's number. She naturally had a way to solve this matter. Qin Ran, why can't you just study well? The person you hit is Su Shen. Teacher Su has taught you well, how could you do this? Ning Qin gritted her teeth. If she could turn back time to the beginning of school, even if Qin Hanxiu didn't want her, she would never have brought Qin Ran back. Do you know that you'll have to go to jail if they investigate? Your whole future will be ruined. Qin Ran leaned back and smirked indifferently. Eyes still bloodshot, she still looked cynical and nonchalant. Oh, she said simply. Ning Qin closed her eyes. Go and apologize to Grandma Su and Teacher Su right away. It's better if they don't pursue this matter. If they do. Ning Qin pursed her lips. After this matter had blown over, she would send her abroad. Leaving her in Yuncheng was a disaster waiting to happen. My face in the Lin family's house has been lost because of you, Qin ran. Outside the door, several policemen didn't dare to take up the matter. Grandma Su had said that she was looking for the bureau. When it came to the bureau, these civilian policemen simply didn't dare to mess around. They waited honestly one by one. Ning Qing came out with Qin Ran and wanted to apologize to Grandma Su and the teenagers. The main office room wasn't big and was almost full. Ning Qing put down her pride and went to appease Grandma Su. Since coming to Yuncheng for so long, she had been careful in everything she did, and she had never put down her pride before. What you say is useless now, my grandson is still in the hospital. Grandma Su stared fiercely at Qin Ran. We will definitely pursue this matter to the end. Ning Qin was at her wit's end. She could only step on her pride and call Lin Qi for help. Just before calling, she got a call from Lin Jinxian. At this time, most people in the police station were off work. Lin Jinxian was tall and slender and had a strong aura that stood out among a group of people. At first glance, it was obvious he wasn't an ordinary person. He looked around and saw Qin Ran standing in the crowd. She was leaning against the wall with her lips pursed indifferently. Lin Jinxian paused and then took 2 steps toward them, stopping beside Ning Qing. Aunt, what's going on? Ning Qing opened her mouth, but she was reassured now. She was very clear about her stepson's ability. Lin Jinxian asked the police some questions. You are all Qin Ran's family. Grandma Su stared sharply at Lin Jinxian. Let me tell you, there is no way I will let her go. My grandson's hand was broken by her and he's still in the emergency room. She must go to jail. We have investigated this matter already. They are all students, the impact on them won't be good. Lin Jinxian didn't know the specific reason and was patient and calm. Several other parents who were angry over their injured children also rushed over. They all started talking at once after knowing their sons had been injured. She's so young but so cruel. How did you even teach her? Which parent would dare to let her study and stay in school? She looks like a vixen, how good of a person could she be? She must pay for this. They were unwilling to let this matter go. Amidst the noisiness, Qin Yu pulled Lin Jinxuan's clothes from behind and smiled obediently. Uncles and aunts, I believe that my sister isn't such an unreasonable person. She must have some unspoken reason. Brother, mother, since they're unwilling to let it go, then let's publicize this matter. No way. Ning Qing immediately retorted. Ning Qing had a splitting headache. She knew just how many times Qin Ran had fought. This time, she knew that it must be Qin Ran who had caused trouble first. If this matter was publicized, she would really have to go to jail. There were too many people in the police station. Lin Jinxian glanced at Qin Ran. She had her head lowered and didn't say a single word to justify herself. She was really indifferent. Lin Jinxian took out his phone and called Feng Ci. Is it wrong to apologize for your wrongdoings? Ning Qing reached out and dragged Qin Ran. Didn't your grandmother teach you? Qin Yu stood behind Ning Qing and pursed her lips. The office hall was in chaos. Grandma Su tried to beat Qin Ran but was stopped by the police. In the mess, a girl who had been squatting in the corner suddenly stood up. Qin Ran saw her. Pan Mingyue. Go back. Pan Mingyue didn't look at her and calmly said, there is indeed an unspoken reason. If you want to publicize it, then I will too. May I ask the police officer, what crime is it to beat up and molest an underage girl? After she said this, the parents, Grandma Su, and even the policemen were all stunned. Chapter 52. Bullying. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Pan Mingyue. Qin Ran stepped forward. But Pan Mingyue avoided her and looked straight at Ning Qing. But Auntie, Qin Ran didn't do anything wrong. She only helped me teach those scums a lesson. She did nothing wrong and doesn't need to apologize to anyone. Pan Mingyue's glasses had been taken away by Su Shen long ago, so at this time, her dark eyes were revealed, clear and calm. The parents of those teenagers froze and reacted quickly. What nonsense, this girl is shameless. Grandma Su simply wanted to rush up and tear Pan Mingyue's mouth off her face. What do you mean? My grandson isn't like that. There's a CCTV at the intersection of that bookstore, and he has a criminal record at Ninghai Town from 3 years ago. Pan Mingyue ignored them, turned to look at the police, and said quietly, "You can investigate and see if it is true. I'm very happy that this time you have decided to publicize it. Officer, you still haven't told me yet, just what crime is it?" She spoke calmly with her back straight and tall. Officer Li almost burned himself with the cigarette in his hand. He looked at Pan Mingyue, stunned, before saying slowly, "If it's a light punishment, a few months. If it's a heavy punishment, then 3 to 5 years." For some reason, the parents who had just been shouting and the aggressive Grandma Su suddenly lost their ability to speak. A policeman holding a notebook noted it down and watched Grandma Su and the others. His gaze changed instantly and he frowned. Grandma Su and the others stood rooted to the ground, their faces ashen and a little awkward. Officer Li's words struck panic in their hearts. Lin Jinchuan's dressing style wasn't ordinary, and it was obvious that his family was rich. They had wanted to publicize this matter only to get more compensation for their sons. But after hearing Pan Mingyue's words, they looked at each other and were a little afraid. The girl was the victim, and according to the police officer, their sons would have to go to jail and would even have a record taken down. Lin Jinxian, who had been staring blankly at them, finally returned to his senses. He had always been agile when dealing with interpersonal relationships and most things, so now he responded faster than Ning Qing and Qin Yu. "Police officer, send someone to investigate and monitor the CCTV first. Oh, and the case at Ninghai Town also needs to be investigated," he said while taking 2 steps forward and lowering his head to look at Qin Ran. She had a touch of blood on her lips. Her lips were pursed tightly and she looked a little cold, but her furrowed eyebrows looked fretful instead. She had her hand in her pocket and her fringe over her face so that her expression couldn't be seen, but it seemed like her face had become paler. "Are you all right?" Lin Jinxian asked in a low voice, his tone gentle. He had just learned that Qin Ran had fought alone with a dozen boys. Girls naturally had poorer physical fitness than boys. No, Qin Ran was stunned for a while after hearing Lin Jinchuan's voice. She looked away and shook her head, leaning against the wall with her long eyelashes hanging down. Her mood appeared very bad. It was like a barrel of oil, where a trace of fire could light it up. On one side, Ning Qing and Qin Yu finally reacted. After Lin Jinxian explained to the police and asked Qin Ran again, his eyes turned to Ning Qing and Qin Yu. He pursed his lips. "Aunt, I think you should be more affectionate and trusting towards your own child. It's not right to only listen to the outsider's side of the story, don't you think?" Qin Yu listened to him beside Ning Qing and dug her fingernails into her palm. Who knew that the situation would become like this? The parents didn't say a word and the police began to inquire about the records. With Lin Jinxian there, they went to check the CCTV as well. It was late now, so Lin Jinxian helped Qin Ran and Pan Mingyue through the formalities and they were soon both released. The aggressive Grandma Su was speechless now, and she just stood there constantly looking out the door, deep in her own thoughts. Deputy Shen received a phone call. He rushed and finally arrived. Su Shen's father was at the hospital to see him, so he wasn't there. Deputy Shen. The policeman who was taking down notes stood up to say hello. Grandma Su's sluggish spirit was refreshed immediately after seeing Deputy Shen. She took 2 steps forward and said, "Deputy Shen, you came at the right time. This person injured my grandson and mustn't be tolerated. Old lady, sit down first. I will handle this matter." Deputy Shen helped her to the side. I'm assured now that you are here. They were trying to scare me, and I can't stand it. Grandma Su deliberately left out information about Pan Mingyue and only focused on how Qin Ran had injured them. I just answered Elder Su's phone call. Your grandson is disabled, so I will definitely give you an account. Deputy Shen's attitude was clear. Deputy Shen, Su Shen was the one who attempted violence in this incident. Lin Jinxian saw Deputy Shen and said calmly, his brows furrowed. Deputy Shen tilted his head and was slightly shocked to see Lin Jinxian. Oh, it turns out to be Master Lin. I know about the incident. Young people can fight and the other party can perform self-defense, but now, Su Shen is the one lying in the hospital. What are you doing? Seeing the list in the hand of the police, Deputy Shen frowned. This matter hasn't been fully investigated yet, how could you let them go? Wait till Su Shen wakes up tomorrow and gives a confession statement. Deputy Shen, what do you mean? Lin Jinxian smiled slightly. There are still some pieces of evidence that haven't arrived yet. We have to do things fairly, don't you agree? Deputy Shen was showing off his strength now. He acted impartially and reasonably, so not even the slightest mistake could be pointed out. He controlled the situation first before talking about private affairs tomorrow. The people at the police station respected Deputy Shen. Although they were cynical of Grandma Su's actions, they were still orderly and listened to his orders. Jin Xian, who is that? Ning Qin looked at Lin Jinxian in panic. This is Yun Chang's Deputy Shen. Lin Jinxian frowned. The Lin family has no relationship with him. I'll ask Aunt if she knows anyone from the Public Security Bureau. The Lin family was mainly engaged in the catering industry and had never really dealt with the police. Even if Qin Ran had the right intentions, it would be difficult for her to go back tonight if they didn't receive a release statement. Bring me all those people first. Deputy Shen wanted to keep an eye on Qin Ran and the other youngsters. Deputy Shen. Ning Qin had always been cautious because of her family problems. When she married into the Lin family, she realized just how big the world was. At this moment, when she heard that he was some deputy, she started to panic. She was just a little citizen, and this kind of authority was capable of overturning her. She also didn't want the Lin family to offend Deputy Shen because of Qin Ran. Furthermore, even Lin Jinxian felt that it would be difficult to handle matters since the deputy was involved. Then let's go back first. Ning Qin reached out and anxiously wanted to pull Lin Jinxian. Lin Jinxian was worried about Qin Ran being alone in the police station. I'll go back and find my dad and aunt first. Lin Jinxian looked at Qin Ran, paused, and reassured her. You can rest assured. Knock knock, it was then that someone knocked on the door frame twice. Chapter 53. Nobody dares to be arrogant in front of Master Cheng. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The knock was very sudden. Everyone looked in the direction subconsciously. Grandma Su was sitting on a stool and holding tea. Since she had a supporter now, she was relaxed and raised her eyebrows to glance at Qin Ran and the rest sideways. When she heard the sound, she turned her head as well. She saw the young police officer at first glance. Excuse me, who is Miss Qin Ran? The police officer glanced through the crowd and finally fixed her eyes on the girl wearing the uniform of First Middle School. The girl had her face turned away, but her beautiful outline could still be seen. Her skin was very white, and she wore her school uniform properly. It was open, and her white shirt inside was stained with a few drops of blood, making thin outlines. With so many people in the crowd, this girl was the most eye-catching, so the police officer's eyes fell on her face subconsciously. Noel.n It wasn't until the girl raised her eyes slightly and looked at her inquiringly that the police officer realized that she was Qin Ran. Ms. Qin, Director Jiang has invited you to the lounge. The police officer bowed slightly. Please follow me. Qin Ran paused, one hand still in her pocket. She tilted her head slightly and narrowed her eyes, wondering who was looking for her. Out of the people she was familiar with, there didn't seem to be anyone with the surname Jiang. Lin Jinxian gave her a questioning look. Qin Ran raised her chin and said quite casually, "It's okay, I'll take a look." She went out of the door. Jiang Hui had been exiled from the capital, and if placed in ancient times, he was suitable for an imperial envoy equivalent to a special envoy. He directly represented the highest oligarchy here. Deputy Shen definitely knew him, but he didn't know that the director Jiang, the police officer was talking about, was the same Jiang Hui that he knew. He watched as Qin Ran followed the police officer and passed by him directly towards the lounge. Deputy Shen was very surprised. He couldn't help but look at Qin Ran, who had already left. He asked the police officer politely, "This director Jiang is?" The police officer glanced at him and, without speaking, turned and left. In the lounge, Jiang Hui was nearly 40 years old. But he was well maintained and looked as if he was in his early 30s. The years left no trace on him. He sat in a chair, reached out and poured 2 cups of tea. He glanced at the tall and slender figure standing by the door and chuckled. "Come sit here and drink tea. I've already sent someone to investigate it. You were so anxious that I thought something had happened. Cheng Wan's business couldn't be delayed. Who knew that after rushing here, it turned out to be a dispute between high school students?" Cheng Mu sat aside and nodded madly in his heart. It was true, wasn't it? This matter could have been settled with a phone call, but he just had to bring Jiang Hui here. How many matters had been delayed because of this? In ancient times, their master Wan was simply an incapable ruler. Lu Xiaoying touched his ear studs and tilted his head. "Uncle Jiang, she's not here yet. What's the rush?" Jiang Hui was curious at this moment. What kind of little girl could make these 2 people so anxious? 2 figures could be seen outside the window. Jiang Hui picked up the teacup and calmly said, "Look, isn't she here already?" After that, his eyes didn't shift away. Cheng Wan's expression was indifferent. His pair of peach blossom eyes were half-squinted and he had his hands around his chest, leaning lazily against the door frame with his slender figure. The familiar figure appeared. Cheng Wan stood straight subconsciously and his eyes fell on her. The little girl followed behind a police officer with her head lowered slightly. She walked over slowly, her uniform loose and making her seem even skinnier and weaker. Her open jacket revealed her white shirt inside. There were bloodstains. Cheng Wan was very sensitive to the 5 senses, and before she even came in, he could detect the strong bloody smell. He leaned against the door, looked at her for a few seconds, and then said with a cold expression, "Right hand." As soon as Qin Ran looked up, she saw Cheng Wan standing by the door and looking at her. She pursed her lips and glanced at him, then slowly drew out the hand in her pocket. After interacting with so many people, none of them had even noticed a problem with her hand. Lu Xiaoying saw that Qin Ran was here and was slightly relieved, but the next second, he saw Qin Ran's hand come out of her pocket. The girl's hands were thin and her nails were clean and moist. Lu Xiaoying had told Cheng Wan more than once that it was the hands of a pianist. The hand was stained with scarlet blood. Some parts were dried while other parts were still dripping. Cheng Wan looked down, lowered his head, and gently opened her fingers with his hands. The 2 wounds stretched across the palm of her hand. The wound was very narrow and blood was still leaking out. Cheng Wan was a doctor, so how could he not know how deep the wound was? He looked at the hand for a while, his pupils turning dark. "Cheng Mu, drive the car over. The wound looked really bad." Cheng Mu glanced at it, his wooden face indifferent, but his lips pursed inadvertently. He went to get the car in silence. Lu Xiaoying returned to his senses and stared at the startling wound. He stood up suddenly. "What's going on?" Jiang Hui had been with the two of them for so long, yet in so many years, he had never seen Cheng Wan so angry before. He couldn't even bear to look him straight. He sat up straight inadvertently and glanced at the director who was sitting on the side, the teacup on the table. A beep sounded. As soon as the director returned home, the police officer gave him a call almost immediately. Director Jiang was coming to inspect their bureau. He didn't know Cheng Wan and Lu Zhaoying, but he knew Jiang Hui. Seeing how polite Jiang Hui was to Cheng Wan, he dropped his teacup and his heart leaped to his throat. What's the matter? You guys even carried private punishments. He immediately tilted his head and asked the police officer. The police officer handed the confession over to Jiang Hui and repeated the situation. The lounge was very quiet and no one spoke except him. The police officer's voice gradually became softer. Cheng Mu was still not back with the car. Lu Zhaoying was accustomed to domineering in Beijing, and Qin Ran had been drawn into his circle. Ha, a chuckle. The police officer felt goosebumps. He looked up cautiously. We'll settle it publicly and privately, Tisk. Lu Zhaoying yanked his collar. His eyes were cold as he walked outside, tilting his head and motioning to a police officer. Where are they? Nobody in the whole city dared to say this in front of Master Cheng before. Chapter 54. Who gave you the courage? You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Office hall in the bureau. Qin Ran's departure had been abrupt, and Deputy Shen's heart was not calm. Qin Yu pursed her lips and watched as Lin Jinxian returned from his phone call. She whispered, Mother, brother, shall we go back first? Aunt is still waiting for us. Ning Qin was now extremely anxious. She didn't speak and just looked at Lin Jinxian. Lin Jinxian glanced in the direction Qin Ran was taken away. He paused for a long while before looking down at his mobile phone. Phone CI just gave me the captain's phone number. I'll find Aunt first, she should have some connections. These things couldn't be explained in a few simple words, so Lin Jinxian couldn't help much by staying here either. He prepared to talk to Lin Wan deeper into the issue. Ning Qin and Qin Yu followed closely behind him. Lin Jinxian noticed her and pursed his lips. Aunt, aren't you staying? Qin Ran was still at the police station and the conclusion hadn't been drawn yet. Impatient and annoyed, she stood where she was and said, I'll wait for the matter to be settled. Drive carefully. Qin Yu followed Lin Jinxian into the car. Coincidentally, a black car drove out of the garage with a Volkswagen brand on the outside. It took people's gaze with it. Qin Yu didn't seem to care about this car much, but Lin Jinxuan's footsteps paused when he saw it. Brother, what's wrong? Qin Yu glanced at him. Lin Jinxian stared at the license plate, then shook his head after a while. It's nothing. Let's go. That was Beijing's license plate number, but now that Qin Ran's affair was pressing, Lin Jinxian didn't think much about it and hurriedly turned to pick up the car. Grandma Su had not realized the tension of the matter. Ever since Deputy Shen came, she had calmed down and had no idea what kind of person she had provoked. She didn't see that Deputy Shen was drinking tea now, suppressing the uneasiness in his heart. Grandma Su took the opportunity to talk to Deputy Shen about Qin Ran and the Lin family. Su Shen might have indeed made a mistake, so it's not too advantageous to him if we publicize this matter. Deputy Shen was slightly relieved. He lowered his head and said to Grandma Su, I was just testing the little girl just now and scaring them. We will settle it privately. Su Shen is so severely injured, the compensation fee must be heavy too. Grandma Su nodded. The moment Pan Mingyue had spoken, she knew that she couldn't publicize this. I'll pay you as much as you want. Ning Qin looked at the sharp and pondered openly, the children can't possibly stay at the police station at night. Ning Qin only had one request now. She mustn't let Qin Ran leave a criminal record behind. She laughed with a stiff face and didn't dare to say anything. Seeing how scared Ning Qing genuinely was, Grandma Su and Deputy Shen relaxed a little. The Lin family was also notorious in Yuncheng, and many people knew that Ning Qing was the second wife. They also knew that Lin Qi's second wife was from a small family and couldn't afford to make much trouble. As for Qin Ran, she was just a student and they needn't worry about her. If you want to pay the compensation, follow the rules. Grandma Su was mean by nature and always spoke while glaring at others. I know. Ning Qing thought about it, picked up her cell phone and went outside to ask her lawyer. After Ning Qing went out, Grandma Su put down her teacup, wiped her mouth with a paper towel, and smirked. The light of fireflies. But she didn't get to finish her sentence. Deputy Shen's cell phone rang. He took out his phone and looked at it, shocked. Chief. The person on the other end said something and caused Deputy Shen to jump up from his chair immediately, the veins on his forehead bulging. Yes, yes. Yes. I understand. In just a few words of dialogue, Deputy Shen's spirit was a bit sluggish. Deputy Shen, what's wrong? Grandma Su held her teacup and took a sip of tea. Deputy Shen rearranged his clothes nervously, his eyes obscure. It's the chief. He had just walked to the door of the office hall and was facing a few people. The chief was still wearing his home clothes as if he had rushed here in a hurry and hadn't had time to change his clothes. The police were very familiar with him. But the chief was obviously one step behind the young man beside him, as if he were following the young man. The police in the hall stood up immediately and called out, "Chief." The other people also looked at him. This was the chief. They couldn't help but look at the person beside him. Who was this man that made the chief walk one step behind him? The young man's eyebrows were down and his fingertips pinched a freshly lit cigarette. He walked forward and then paused, looking at the house full of people, and then laughed. There are a lot of people here, eh? He looked around and saw the girl in the corner. The girl had her head down, her short hair tied softly, and she seemed to be holding a cell phone. She seemed to be deep in thought, and a female officer was beside her. Young Master Lu. The chief said carefully. Lu Xiaoying turned his head, glanced at Grandma Su's direction, and then at the squatting teenagers in the room. You're Qin Ran's classmate, right? Come here, I'll take you to find her. Subconsciously, Lu Xiaoying lightened his voice. Chief, settle this privately first, then publicize it. Lu Xiaoying could settle this small matter with a few simple words. He really used his identity to compete with them and pressurize them. I'll take them back first. My lawyer will come soon. I hope I won't see similar things happening in the future. The chief wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. I understand, young Master Lu. He sent them to the door. The chief's voice was so low and small, so nobody dared to even speak in the originally noisy hall. Who, the people in the hall dared to breathe now. When Lu Xiaoying had left with Pan Mingyue, Grandma Su responded. Deputy Shen, what? What is going on? Who is that person? Deputy Shen also spoke quietly, the chief. The chief watched as Lu Xiaoying left. This time, he turned sideways and looked at Deputy Shen for a long while, before finally shaking his head. It's best if this matter is settled privately. If you are lucky, this matter can be resolved peacefully. Then what about the compensation? Grandma Su had planned it to be settled privately, so she didn't care too much about it. You still want them to compensate for the loss. If your family can make them settle it privately, it's already considered a once-in-a-lifetime stroke of luck. They want to publicize it eventually. Deputy Shen, are you muddle-headed? Who gave you the courage to try to bring Director Jiang into this, huh? Chapter 55. Kick the Iron Plate. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Deputy Shen's legs went weak at his words and his palms started sweating. Director Jiang. The chief shook his head and called Officer Li out for a detailed inquiry. Grandma Su noticed that something was wrong. She squeezed her hands and stared at Deputy Shen with turbid eyes. Deputy Shen, I didn't hear clearly just now. Who was the chief talking about? Director Jiang Hui, the one reported daily by Yunqing Evening News. You have really done me harm this time. Deputy Shen wiped his face and stared at her. Then he immediately chased after the chief. He had really kicked the iron plate this time. He had a good relationship with Su Shen's father and had thought that this was just a small tension between high school students, so he had come to help out. Who knew that even Jiang Hui was involved? Now, he could barely protect himself. Ning Qing just called the lawyer. She had yet to see Su Shen's injury report, so she just talked about it briefly. If she wanted to settle it privately, she would have to compensate an estimated 800,000 yuan. This was a small sum of money for the Lin family, but Lin Qi had the details of Ning Qing's card records. Ning Qing walked inside the police station while pressing her temple. Mrs. Ning. The policewoman came forward politely. Her attitude was so good it was a little strange. Ning Qing looked up. My daughter. Oh, the chief is dealing with the matter now. The policewoman took her pen and lowered her head to write down her notes. Your daughter has already left the police station. As for Su Shen, we have already sent people to transfer the Ninghai town's files, and we will also bring people there to question him. When the section chief politely sent her out, Ning Qing had not fully figured out what was going on. The chief was dealing with the matter. What did this have to do with the chief? She didn't even know who the chief was. The school's medical office had incomplete tools, so Cheng Mu drove the car directly to the hospital. Cheng Wan had a temporary sterilization box in his car but didn't have other tools, so he could only help her disinfect it and handled it slightly. The lights in the back seat were on. It was either because Cheng Mu's driving was stable or because the car was performing well, but the journey was smooth and without any bumps. Cheng Wan lowered his eyes and wrapped the bandages thinly. He swept disinfected water across her 2 wounds gently. Because Qin Ran's skin was too white, the contrast of bright red was even more obvious. His heart ached and tightened at the sight. He paused, cleared his throat, and looked up. You. He saw Qin Ran holding the window in her left hand, leaning lazily on the backrest with her head tilted. She was looking out the window, and the light shone a shadow under her dark eyes. Her eyes were narrowed slightly, and when he looked closely, it seemed absent-minded and slightly cynical. Qin Ran didn't move her hand. She slightly tilted her head and opened her mouth slowly. What? Her eyes were clear and her expression was plain as if she didn't have 2 wounds on her hand. The phrase, if it hurts, tell me, was swallowed back into his throat. Cheng Wan stared into her eyes and couldn't look away from those eyes filled with a sea of stars. They arrived at the hospital soon. In the evening, the doctor was ready to help her with stitches. Cheng Wan held a cell phone against the wall and talked with Lu Zhaoying. It's good to be 18, Cheng Wan said, his eyes falling heavily on the door. He had a lit cigarette between his fingertips and his expression was still lazy, but his words were cool. All the responsibilities can be taken. The stitches on Qin Ran's hand were sewn, and the anesthesia time was estimated to be over soon. Cheng Wan kept the phone and subconsciously wanted to get rid of the cigarette. Don't avoid me. Qin Ran thought for a moment, then tilted her head and leaned against the wall. She looked into his eyes and smiled. Give me one. Her voice was light. Cheng Wan stumped his cigarette without changing his expression and threw it into the trash. He also threw away the cigarettes in his pocket. Qin Ran didn't mind. She just shrugged and said, thank you for today. You can deduct the expenses from my pay. Cheng Wan looked at her back as she walked in front of him, pressed his temple with his fingers and stood there for a long while. Over here. Ning Qing returned to the Lin family's house. Lin Chi was sitting in the lobby. Lin Jinxian hung up his phone call and saw that she was back. Aunt, why are you back? How is Qin Ran? Qin Yu heard the voices and put down her violin. Aunt, mother seems to be back. Shall we go down and take a look? She led Lin Wan downstairs. Ning Qing was still thinking about the chief. She had called Qin Ran but she didn't pick up. Now that she saw Lin Wan, she didn't know how to speak all of a sudden. She pursed her lips and didn't speak. What's the matter, making the whole family so restless? Jin Xian and my brother have been looking for people the whole night. Lin Wan took a sip of tea and glanced at Ning Qing. This matter isn't so simple. Lin Jinxian shook his head. Deputy Shen intervened. Aunt, is there anyone you know in the Public Security Bureau? Lin Wan put the teacup on the table and said nothing. Aunt, please help my sister. She's still detained at the police station. Qin Yu shook Lin Wan's arm. Detained at the police station. Lin Wan glanced at Ning Qing until Ning Qing was too embarrassed and looked back. You are ridiculous. I do know a few people. I can find them tomorrow. Ning Qing was relieved. The Ning family really couldn't find a few acquaintances, so it was good that Lin Wan offered to help. Jin Xian, do you know their chief? Ning Qing asked Lin Jinxian. Ha, Lin Wan laughed. Brother, Jin Xian, I'll go to bed first. Ning Qing sat on the sofa, on her pins and needles. Lin Jinxian explained, our Lin family is only a merchant. After all, the Lin family had a very weak foundation. That was why it was strange. Ning Qing smiled awkwardly. She didn't know much about such things, but... She frowned. What had that policewoman meant? Could it be that Qin Ran or Pan Mingyuan knew him? The next day. Early in the morning. The sound of classroom exercises in the dormitory building kept sounding. Qin Ran had already asked for leave, but the noise was still unbearable. She got out of bed irritably. Her eyes were bloodshot. Yesterday, Lu Xiaoying had taken the school uniform coat to the dry cleaners and she had taken a thin black jacket on the way. At this moment it was time for official exercises, but first middle school rarely had drills, and the lesson period was long, so the students all went out to buy snacks. People came and went. Qin Ran had her head lowered slightly and was dressed neatly in her school uniform. She half-squinted her apricot eyes and frowned slightly. In the past 2 days, Xiao Sheng hadn't paid much attention to Qin Yu. Qin Yu had felt it, but she pretended that it was nothing. He went downstairs with Su Yaoguang to buy lollipops, and Qin Yu went with them to discuss a few questions with Su Yaoguang in a low voice. Most of the people's eyes were on them along the way. Xiao Sheng put one hand in his pocket, and there were a few younger brothers following him. Qin Ran took leave today. He peeled a lollipop and stuffed it into his mouth, and then tilted his head and asked Su Yaoguang. Su Yaoguang was today's discipline leader. Su Yaoguang was cold. He paused, then shook his head. I don't know. Qin Yu stood aside and froze. Don't you guys know? What? About my sister. Qin Yu pursed her lips, then shook her head and played with her fingers. She committed a crime, so she's still in the police station. Chapter 56. Strike to the face. You are listening at novelfull.audio. No one spoke for a while. Qin Ran's voice wasn't low. Several people around Xiao Sheng heard it and looked at each other. The people passing by also went over to listen. What happened? Qin Yu, how do you know? Oh my God, she got locked up. What crime did she commit for her to be locked up? Qin Yu was a popular figure in the school. Especially during this period, Xiao Sheng and others were covered by her limelight. Everyone surrounded her. BDNVL.M being locked in a police station was not a trivial matter. According to the development of this situation, it would take less than an afternoon for the news to be passed throughout the school. Qin Yu walked on the right side of Qiao Sheng, closest to the side of the road, and Qiao Sheng had stopped moving the lollipop around in his mouth. He pushed it to the side, looked at Qin Yu, and frowned. What happened? It's a criminal case, said Qin Yu ambiguously. She felt the eyes of the people around her and whispered, I think she won't be able to come out for a while. Sai, stop asking me, I don't want to talk about it. Before she could finish talking, an empty water bottle suddenly hit her. Bang, there was a loud noise, and it slammed into the tree a few steps away and bounced to her feet again. People who were still gossiping looked in the direction the water bottle came from. Qin Ran was standing a dozen meters away, with one hand in her pocket. Ignoring everyone, she looked straight ahead and walked forward. Her eyes were narrowed slightly and her eyebrows furrowed. She had on her familiar nonchalant and cold look. She frowned. It seemed like the school atmosphere was a bit heavy today and it was also so crowded. However, everyone stayed a meter away from her and no one dared to approach her. Qiao Sheng looked at her and froze. Qin Ran. Qin Ran answered with a nasal sound and then looked up. What? She still had on her familiar expression. She wore a long coat that hung down naturally, covering most of the right hand, where only a little gauze was exposed. Nothing. Qiao Sheng glanced at Qin Yu sideways, bit his lollipop, and finally smiled. I heard that you were locked up in the police station and was just preparing to go bail you out. He put his hands in his pockets, leaned over slightly, and told Su Yaoguang not to go to the store. Why are you out? Qin Yu looked at Qin Ran in disbelief. Due to Qin Ran's affairs, Ning Qing and the others had discussed for a long time yesterday. They had yet to find a solution and could only wait for someone to give it a try today. According to the aggressive attitude of the Su family last night, it had been estimated that Qin Ran would have to be locked up for at least 2 to 3 days. Who knew that within one night, she was already back in school? Qin Ran put her hand in her pocket and turned away. Qiao Sheng waved to Su Yaoguang and immediately followed her. Didn't she say that Qin Ran's crime got her locked up, and she still had to stay there for a few more days? Yeah, how can someone locked up be here? After Qin Ran and Qiao Sheng had left, everyone looked at Qin Yu and discussed fervently. Their tones were strange and doubtful. Qin Yu had been in school for such a long time, and this was the first time she was being doubted. She opened her mouth and smiled reluctantly. There was some panic in her heart. As soon as she looked up, she saw Su Yaoguang looking at her solemnly. In his cold eyes, the light had faded. Qin Yu subconsciously pinned the hair that had fallen over her face behind her ears and pursed her lips. Feng family. Lin Wan had come with Lin Jinxian. Mrs. Feng was very welcoming and even asked about Qin Yu. Upstairs, Feng Luqing came down with his mobile phone. Lin Wan, who had been sitting on the couch, stood up immediately with Lin Jinxian. Recently, everyone who knew anything knew that Feng Luqing was about to be promoted. However, there was no specific news as to what position. Water to a fish was as Mrs. Feng to Lin Wan. But in the face of Feng Luqing, she was somewhat restrained. If it was not because Lin Jinxian was familiar with Feng Ci, they wouldn't have been able to see Feng Luqing. Mayor Feng. Lin Wan stood up. Feng Luqing's eyes were almost inconceivable, and even she was very restrained. Lin Jinxian also greeted him. Feng Luqing glanced at the two of them with the same expression on his face. He let Mrs. Feng and Feng Ci entertain the two and smiled. I have a business matter to attend to, so I will take my leave. Yes, please attend to your business, Lin Wan said quickly. Of course, the mayor of a city was busy. How would she dare let Feng Luqing entertain them? It was already unexpected for Lin Wan to see him today. Usually, they could only see him on the TV news or in reports. However, this Feng Luqing was truly not very sociable. Feng Luqing nodded, held his cell phone to his ear, and strode out. Far away, Lin Wan and Lin Jinxian faintly heard the word Ms. Qin. Lin Wan paused, thinking about which big surname in Yuncheng had the word Qin. After thinking for a long time, she still had no clue, so she regained her senses and talked to Mrs. Feng. They didn't stay long before going out. Feng Luqing didn't go to his office. Instead, he parked his car in front of a private kitchen. Although his license plate number was assigned and was very special, because of his low-key behavior on a normal basis, few people in Yuncheng knew his license plate. After waiting for about 20 minutes, a taxi stopped at the door, and a girl in a plaid thin shirt came down from the back door. The other person's earphones were plugged into her ears. She was looking down, absent-minded and indifferent. On the other hand, Feng Luqing looked solemn and opened the car door to walk over. Ms. Qin. He spoke first, with a steady and serious tone. Upon closer inspection, it was even a little respectful. As if he didn't seem to think there was anything wrong with calling a girl who was more than 20 years younger than him Ms. Qin. Uncle Feng. Qin Ran took off her earphones and squinted her eyes. She saw Feng Luqing clearly and nodded slightly. Just call me by my name. Feng Luqing smiled but did not answer. Qin Ran was obviously used to it. She said nothing and turned to walk in first. Let's go inside to talk. Feng Luqing walked half a step behind her and helped her open the door. Not far from the opposite side, there was a very sharp braking sound. The black BMW stopped. What's wrong? Lin Wan, who was sitting in the passenger seat, had been putting on lipstick when the car stopped. Her lipstick almost bumped against her nose. Lin Jinxian shook his head and looked at the opposite side. Aunt, isn't that person Qin Ran? Chapter 57. Found out you are listening at novelfull.audio. Lin Wan looked up and followed his gaze. A man in a gray blazer was opening the door, leaning forward slightly, very polite. Since she had just come out of Feng Luqing's house, Lin Wan was naturally familiar with this back view and the slightly concealed face. Isn't this the mayor? Feng Luqing had climbed to this position before he was even 50 years old. He was humble but had a sort of domineering spirit in his bones. But at this time, that sharp spirit had all converged. Lin Wan couldn't help wondering who was the one who could make Yuncheng's mayor walk a half step behind and give this respectful attitude. You said she was Qin Ran. Lin Wan hesitated, turning her eyes to the girl in the plaid shirt who had already entered the door. The girl only showed her back and wasn't wearing a school uniform. Half of her body was covered by Feng Luqing. Lin Wan had only seen Qin Ran once, so she couldn't recognize her. She put away her lipstick, smiled, and thoughtfully looked back. How could it be her? You must have seen it wrongly. She only came out of the police station last night, how could she possibly see the mayor now? The person who could make Feng Luqing walk a step behind and open the door for her was Qin Ran. Even throughout the whole of Yuncheng, Lin Wan couldn't even think of anyone who could make Feng Luqing be so respectful. In the room, Qin Ran pulled a chair to the window and sat down. Feng Luqing poured 2 cups of tea and pushed one to Qin Ran. Qin Ran pushed open the window. There was an artificial lake downstairs. She leaned back against the chair, held the teacup in her left hand but did not drink it, just turned it around in her hands. Feng Luqing saw that her right hand was wrapped in gauze and frowned, his voice tense. Your hand. Why are you so nervous? I can't die from this. Qin Ran leaned lazily against the back of her chair, raising her brows slightly. Nonsense. Feng Luqing rarely raised his elder attitude. What do you mean it's alright, do you know how much your hands? Hearing this, Qin Ran leaned on her chin, tilted her head, and glanced at him. Feng Luqing paused and stared at Qin Ran. He changed the topic, but his face was still black. I'll take you to the hospital to do a check. Up. It's really okay, Qin Ran said, looking at the palm of her right hand and smiling indifferently. I came to you to talk about Mingyue. Mingyue. Feng Luqing glanced at her hand and forced himself to look away. Have you met? She must have been happy to see you. Qin Ran nodded and said, we met Su Shen yesterday. Him. Feng Luqing's face sank, and the teacup landed on the table with a slam. Qin Ran summarized the incident to him. That scum. Feng Luqing grimaced. Don't worry about this, I'll deal with it. Okay. The dishes were almost here, all of which Qin Ran liked to eat. She propped her legs up and ate with her chopsticks. Although Feng Luqing was thinking about Pan Mingyue, his eyes were still staring at her. He immediately asked the server to clear the dishes. Your hand is injured, why are you eating spicy food? Qin Ran faced a healthy bowl of soup. Feng Luqing ordered a few more bowls of light healthy dishes. In front of Qin Ran's very apathetic face, he bowed his head and muttered quietly, If they know that you were so badly injured on my sight, my skin will be cut off. Qin Ran poked at the stir-fried cabbage with a few grains of wolfberry expressionlessly. There was no fluctuation in her heart and she even wanted to laugh. Su Shen, at this time, did not know that his impulsiveness had reigned in two wise and powerful men. Father Su was in the hospital all night. Su Shen was injured in many places, and both of his arms were broken. Even if he recovered, it would still have an impact on him. He didn't know who had beaten his son, but he didn't plan on letting the other party go for injuring his son this severely. It wasn't until Deputy Shen talked to him on the phone that he knew the other party was Qin Ran. Why didn't you tell me that it was Qin Ran yesterday? Father Su hung up the phone, his heart beating in anger. Grandma Su didn't expect his reaction to be so big. Isn't that the student you taught before? I know you like her, but she hit. I told you before that Su Shen deserved it. You. Father Su inhaled sharply. He couldn't help but light a cigarette and looked at the police officer who was looking for Su Shen's confession, frowning. He didn't dare to find Qin Ran, nor did he have the face to. Although there was a relationship between master and apprentice, Qin Ran might not even acknowledge him if he went. After thinking about it for a while, Father Su went out and made several phone calls. After seeing Feng Luqing, Qin Ran returned to class. But when she got back, the class had just ended. Mu Ying stood at the entrance of the classroom and waited for her. Cousin, are you back? Seeing Qin Ran, Mu Ying twisted her fingers, looked down at her hand, and asked carefully, is your hand okay? This morning, the whole school, and even the forum, had been discussing Qin Ran's injured hand. Some people even went to the store to buy a lot of chocolates and other snacks to see her. In the classroom, Xiao Sheng, who had been leaning on the table and chatting away, saw Qin Ran and immediately stood up. He called her. I'm fine. Qin Ran squinted. Don't tell Aunt about it. You can go back first. Mu Ying said, oh, but didn't leave immediately. She stood at the window and couldn't help but look into the class. The handsome and sunny boy was walking to Qin Ran's table, his eyes gentle, the complete opposite of his overbearing and arrogant description. She couldn't help thinking of how Li Yuhan had described Xiao Sheng. A veritable rich second generation with several minds in his family. Cousin. Many people come in and out of class 3.9 from time to time. They all smiled and greeted Mu Ying. They copied Qin Ran and called her Mu Ying cousin. Mu Ying blushed and responded. She glanced through the window again before leaving. In the class, Lin Siren poured water into Qin Ran's thermos lid. The next class is biology class. Seeing how Qin Ran finished the water, she screwed the lid and walked over to help her find her books. Qin Ran had many books. She had several notes and materials, plus original extracurricular books and textbooks. There was not only a large stack on the table but also several placed on the windowsill. Lin Siren finally found her biology textbook from a pile of books and pulled it out. A piece of paper floated down. Qin Ran was stunned. Lin Siren immediately stooped to pick up the paper. Ran, do you want this paper? Why aren't you talking? Xiao Sheng looked over. Don't tell me it's a love letter. Before he finished talking, he was also stunned. The paper was full of words, the stance unrestrained and incredibly reckless. The vigor of the handwriting was full of willfulness. Chapter 58. Who said Qin Ran didn't learn the violin well? You are listening at novelfull.audio. The paper had floated out of Qin Ran's book, so they naturally thought that it belonged to her. But the handwriting. It was too different from Qin Ran's. The writer had probably been specially trained. Qin Ran didn't expect her paper to have fallen out. She was sitting on her chair, holding her phone in her left hand and resting her right hand on the table. She had to take care of her injured right hand, so her movements were a little awkward. She raised her eyebrows when she saw the paper. This handwriting looks really good. Lin Siren reacted first. She picked up the paper and patted it on the table, looked at the content and was particularly excited. Qin Ran, you're also Yan Shi's fan. The lyrics of a song just released by Yan Shi was on the paper. As a fan, Lin Siren naturally recognized it. Qin Ran tilted her head and said in an unwavering tone, I'm really not. Then why do you have the lyrics to Yan Shi's song? Lin Siren held up the paper in her hands. Xiao Xing couldn't tell that it was lyrics. He just reached out and pulled it away. This is definitely not copied down by her. How could she write so well? Oh yeah, who gave it to you? Xiao Sheng was really a little genius. Suddenly, Qin Ran calmed down. She played with her mobile phone in her left hand, tilted her body, and laughed. Oh, my neighbor wrote it. Is his handwriting nice? Yes. Lin Siren nodded frantically, and then glanced down again. Your neighbor could probably write posts with this standard. Why didn't you practice to write so well? Xiao Xing snorted. Qin Ran looked down at her mobile phone and ignored him. As class approached, Xiao Xing returned to his seat. Qin Ran's hand still needed to be bandaged again. Cheng Mu had taken all the medicine to the school medical office yesterday. 2 people in the school doctor's office could help her change her bandage. When Qin Ran arrived at the school medical office, Lu Zhaoying was standing outside the door and calling someone. His tone seemed serious, and he waved at her when she passed. Cheng Wan was in the school medical office. He was still leaning lazily against the sofa, with his computer on his legs. His expression was lazy, but his clear brows seemed to have a sense of frustration. You're here. Cheng Wan set the computer aside and took out the medicine chest. He signaled for Qin Ran to sit down and then sat next to her. He opened the bandage carefully to reveal the wound inside. He made a few stitches and the wound looked bad. It was easy for the palm to sweat in summer, so it was inevitable that water would touch the wound and mess with the medicine. Cheng Wan took a cotton swab, pinched her finger, and carefully cleaned it up with medical alcohol, careful not to touch the wound. Does it hurt? It's okay, Qin Ran said lazily with her left hand supporting her chin. It's not that serious. Cheng Wan gave a low, and didn't say a word, but his movements lightened a lot. His eyebrows were down, his long eyelashes covered, and his outline looked hazy. After changing the medicine, he saw Qin Ran getting up and leaving. Cheng Wan asked her where she was going. The canteen. Lin Siren is still waiting for me to eat. Qin Ran looked at her right hand and felt like it wasn't as painful as it had been yesterday. She was injured and naturally couldn't work. In the morning after class, she had already pushed aside her part-time job at the bubble tea shop. She still wanted to squeeze with others at the canteen. Wasn't she afraid of the wound opening up again? The corners of Cheng Wan's lips curled up. Qin Ran didn't notice and just waved her left hand. I'll get going first then. When she walked out of the door, she met Lu Xiaoying, who had just returned from the phone call and even said hello. Lu Xiaoying threw the phone on the table and scratched his head. Where is she going? Why not let her stay for dinner? Cheng Wan turned and sat back down on the sofa. His lips were pursed and he looked cold. Lu Xiaoying couldn't understand his attitude but didn't dare to ask. He only changed the topic. That Deputy Shen went to Uncle Jiang. Cheng Wan drew a cigarette and bit it, smirking. What a coward, wasn't he very prestigious? The bottom of his eyes was cold and there was no hint of a smile. Cheng Mu, who just came in. The other party could be squeezed to death with one finger. How could Deputy Shen possibly not cower? The Lin family. When Father Su found the place, Lin Qi and Lin Jinxian were both not at home. Ning Qing sat in the gazebo in the yard to entertain him. There was no follow-up news from the Public Security Bureau. Ning Qing had gathered a few pieces, sold some jewelry, and put up $500,000 in a card. Today Lin Jinxian brought back news that Su Shen had broken both hands. The consequences were severe. Ning Qing worked really hard to settle the follow-up and ensure that Qin Ran wouldn't have to be sued and jailed. Last night she practically didn't sleep and had to use a lot of foundation to cover up her dark eye circles. She didn't expect that Father Su would come. Mrs. Lin. Father Su knew Ning Qing. Ning Qing held the bank card in her hand and didn't want anyone in the Lin family to see her ugly state. Aunt Zhang, go down first. I will talk to Mr. Su. Zhang Yan glanced at her and hesitated, but returned after serving a pot of tea. Who's here? Inside the room, Lin Wan put her shawl in her hands and came downstairs. Aunt Zhang pursed her lips, poured another cup of tea for Lin Wan, and lowered her voice. Who else could it be? It's Mr. Su, and I saw Madam holding a bank card. Lin Wan sat on the sofa, heard the words, and smiled. She didn't say more. Outside. Father Su was sitting on a stool, restless and not knowing what to say. Mr. Su, I'm so sorry, my child. Sigh. He was expressionless, so Ning Qing misunderstood his intentions. She poured him a cup of tea and spoke first, putting her pride down. She didn't dare go out since last night. She was afraid to meet the eyes of the servants, especially that of the Lin family. Ning Qing took a sip of tea. You also know how Qin Ran is. She was never obedient since young. She clearly learned the violin before Yuer, but who would guess that Yuer is almost in 9th grade, and yet her violin is still so average. And she even hit your son. I'm so ashamed to even talk about this. Father Su had come with a trembling heart and had kept drinking water to ease his nerves. He didn't expect Ning Qing to say this. He held the teacup in his hand and was a little confused. Wait, Mrs. Lin. Ning Qing held the bank card in her hand and looked up at him. Father Su looked at her. No, who said that Qin Ran didn't learn the violin well? She obviously. Chapter 59. 2 slaps. You are listening at novelfull.audio. She had already reached a professional level. Her violin was extremely good and she was his proud disciple. She used to be and still was. Mom, I'm back, a clear voice from outside interrupted Father Su's thoughts. The driver pushed open the door and Qin Yu came in with a stack of books. She saw Ning Qing sitting with Father Su in the gazebo on the left, turned, and said quietly, Mom, your friend is here. Qin Yu had not seen Father Su before. She looked him up and down and couldn't remember who he was. He probably wasn't close to the Lin family. Otherwise, Lin Wan would have come out to entertain him. Qin Yu quietly looked at the bank card in Ning Qing's hand and guessed very smartly. Is this Su Shen's father? Inside the room, Lin Wan drank half a cup of tea, gathered her shawl, and walked out slowly, her movements graceful. The other servants didn't dare to look up, but they moved lightly and listened with pointed ears. Ning Qing could feel the servants occasionally glance over with strange expressions. From yesterday to today, news of the Lin family members running around for Qin Ran, who had been detained by the police due to a fight, had already spread throughout the whole Lin family. It had taken her 12 years to create the image of a magnificent lady of her own. In just 1 month, she seemed to have become a joke. Mr. Su, it's not good for anyone if this matter is publicized. If it's possible, it's best to settle it privately. It'll be good for our family's reputation too, Lin Wan said. Lin Wan had no intention of bothering about Ning Qing's daughter, nor did she want to spend time on such things. She didn't know why Lin Qi and Lin Jinxian had to protect this stepdaughter Qin Ran, who could bring nothing to the table except for her pretty face. However, since Lin Jinxian had already come to her for help, she couldn't just stand by and watch. Uncle Su, my sister finally had the opportunity to come to First Middle School. She has been delayed for a year already and can't take a break anymore. Qin Yu took her schoolbag back to the servant. She didn't like Qin Ran, but she hated the idea of an elder sister behind bars even more. I want to settle it privately too. Father Su quickly took out his check and embarrassedly said, "This is my son's fault. On account of me having taught Ran before, tell her to request for the chief to stop pressurizing my son. She definitely wouldn't want to see me, so Mrs. Lin, could you help me hand this check to her?" Speaking of this, he bowed his head in shame. This is a $1 million compensation. I heard that Ran's hand was also injured. Her hand. Nothing could happen to her hand. Hearing this, the room was silent, and even Ning Qing had yet to respond. Qin Yu looked at Father Su in shock. How could there be such a big reversal all of a sudden? Father Su gave the check to Ning Qing and turned to leave. Lin Wan squinted at Father Su's back for a long time and then at Ning Qing, who was still rooted in place. Her voice was particularly clear as she asked, "Your daughter knows the chief?" Ning Qing was also shocked. Her realization came later. So Qin Ran wasn't at fault in this matter. From the moment she had known about this matter, she had accused her subconsciously. She hadn't listened to her explanation and hadn't even known that her hand was injured. Looking down at the $1 million check in her hand, Ning Qing's heart trembled. Even Father Su knew that she had a hand injury, but she, as her mother, hadn't known about it until just now. Qin Yu looked at the scene, digging her fingernails into the palm of her hand. She said, "Aunt, I reorganized a tune last night. Do you want to listen to it and see if Teacher Wei will like it?" Lin Wan had stayed in the Lin family for so long to watch Qin Yu practice the violin. It was her top priority. Late self-study. Qin Ran leaned against the wall and threw a notebook onto Lin Siren's table. She had a lollipop in her mouth and was absent-minded. "What is this?" Lin Siren flipped through the notebook. It was a physics review note, and she opened her mouth softly. She opened it and took a look at the 3 cursive words written on the title page. She only recognized one song and one law. Qin Ran's eyelids were squinting. Perhaps it was because of her hand, but she was a little wan and her voice was hoarse. "Someone gave me that, you can take a look." "Oh." Lin Siren nodded. She turned a few pages and accepted Qin Ran's kindness, but didn't pay much attention to it. She just set it aside. Qin Ran put her mobile phone on the table and flipped through the book in her hand while deep in thought. Her eyebrows looked frustrated and she bit the lollipop in her mouth into pieces. Lin Siren helped her unscrew the lid of her bottle and poured water into it. Ran, your phone is ringing." She pointed to Qin Ran's mobile phone that was vibrating constantly. "Don't worry about it." Qin Ran didn't even look up. She squinted her eyes and her voice was lazy. The caller was Ning Qing, and she was too lazy to answer. After self-study. Qin Ran didn't return to the dormitory with Lin Siren. She cleared her throat and tilted her head slightly. I'm going to buy something. Need my help? Lin Siren looked at her hand. No, Qin Ran walked towards the door of the school, waving back to Lin Siren and smiling. I'll come back immediately. There were many students living in school who had self-study, and students also came back to school to study as well, but there were only a few. It was deserted and dark outside the school. Qin Yu had originally been practicing the violin at home, but she kept thinking about Qin Ran's affairs and couldn't calm down. She wasn't playing the violin well and was afraid Lin Wan would hear it, so she made an excuse to come to school. She always felt that Qin Ran was out of her control. Mississippi, the driver of the Lin family, opened the door and let Qin Yu get on. Qin Yu nodded and was just about to get in the car when she saw a familiar figure out of the corner of her eye. She gestured slightly to the driver to wait for her and walked to an alley in the school's residential area. There were no lights in the alley. Only the faint yellow street lights at the intersection. Qin Ran hid at the intersection, looking around carefully. She saw a black car at the end of the alley, a Mercedes. Qin Ran stood by the door. Beside her, there was a man. Because he was facing away from Qin Yu, she couldn't see his face, but she vaguely saw that he wasn't young. The figure had a vaguely familiar side face. Qin Yu was startled. From February 15, 2020, coins spent on books that aren't selected will be refunded within 30 days. However, fast passes will not be refunded. The selected book will have a mark on the corner of the book cover in 30 days to indicate continuation. Thank you for your understanding. Chapter 60. Terrified Chief, come to the door. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Why was Qin Ran with an old man in the middle of the night? Driving a Mercedes. There was a sense of familiarity in that person's back. Qin Yu pursed her lips. Not far away. Oh, Qin Ran stood leaning against the door of the car. Her whole figure was hidden in the shadow from the wall and she tilted her head sideways, having a slight headache. There's no need for such trouble. I inquired about it, you'll make up for whatever you eat. Feng Luqing put an insulation container in her left hand and persuaded her carefully. Nourish your skin. Okay, just this time, Qin Ran had a headache and said sincerely. Feng Luqing just looked at her like an old father and didn't promise nor refuse. Qin Ran returned to the bedroom with the container. What's this? Lin Siren helped her open it and took a bowl. Wu Yan was taking a bath in the bathroom. Qin Ran sat down on a stool, her eyes down, her feet laying lazily on the table. She leaned back and said, I don't know. Lin Siren unscrewed the lid and looked inside. Pig's foot soup, wolfberry, and a hint of Chinese medicine. Lin Siren was sitting in another chair, lying on the table watching her drink soup. Ran, Ednel.co. Qin Ran turned her head to the side and squinted her eyes slightly. She was slightly relaxed and her voice was quite low. Yeah. As for our self-study and discussion on the class speech contest in the evening, our only senior high school event, would you join me? Lin Siren blinked with her hand on her chin. I have to add on to the number of people. Qin Ran glanced at her with an eyebrow raised. No, you are now the face of our class. Lin Siren's eyes flashed. You just have to stand in front and read the speech we wrote. I'm certain we'll score 5 points higher than the other classes. As the campus bell, Qin Ran was indeed class 3. 9's face. It turned out she was selling her face. After drinking the soup, Qin Ran thought for a moment and nodded, easygoing. Sure. The next day, the Lin family welcomed another guest. Deputy Shen. Lin Chi thought for a moment. The Lin family had no relationship with the political world. There were so many intricacies there, and the politicians cherished their plumage and didn't interact easily. Only Lin Jinxian knew Feng Xiai, but even so, he wasn't close to him. As Deputy Shen approached, Lin Qi and Lin Wan were very cautious. Lin Qi personally poured tea to Deputy Shen. "Deputy, you're looking for me because of my stepdaughter." Lin Qi and Deputy Shen didn't have any relationship, so he knew the motive behind his arrival immediately. Deputy Shen held the water, his expression very bad, his tone sincere. "I didn't have any choice, so I could only come and find you. What happened that night was all a misunderstanding. As long as Ms. Qin agrees to privatize the matter, I will owe her a favor." Lin Qi had also been running around for Qin Ran's affairs yesterday, but who knew that things would have changed so much in one day? He looked at Lin Wan and knew that things weren't simple. Lin Qi was expressionless. He put down his teacup and laughed. Ran doesn't stay here. This matter. To be honest, the chief is paying attention to this matter. Deputy Shen smiled bitterly. There were indeed internal affairs after investigating deeper into Ms. Qin's case. As long as you're willing to help me, you can come and find me if the Lin family needs help in the future. As a businessman, this business really did work. Deputy Shen's favor wasn't so easy to come across. But Lin Qi didn't agree and was ambiguous. This matter depends on Ran. When Deputy Shen was gone, Lin Wan pressed her eyebrows. "Brother, why didn't you agree? We can relay the message for him." Lin Qi shook his head, his expression calm. He said slowly, "But we can't agree in Ran's place." Ning Qin looked at the two of them, holding the phone thoughtfully. Not far from First Middle School's door. The black car drove carelessly. Lu Xiaoying was drowsy in the passenger seat. "Master Wan, that Su Shen was brought to the detention center. I asked for Qin Ran and Pan Mingyue's file in Ninghai town, but I couldn't find everything." Lu Xiaoying thought it was strange. Normally, as long as the chief asked for it, such files were easily transferred over. He glanced over at Cheng Wan, who still hadn't moved, and raised his eyebrows. Cheng Wan had been the most active one before. Cheng Wan was sitting behind, leaning halfway on the window. His head tilted slightly and looked outside lazily, quiet and attentive. Lu Xiaoying felt he was weird and glanced over. He suddenly smiled. "Ah, isn't that Qin Ran? Why is she coming out?" Cheng Mu, who was driving, glanced at Cheng Wan's dark eyes in the rearview mirror and stepped on the brake subconsciously. Master Wan indeed got out of the car. Cheng Mu couldn't help but take a closer look at Qin Ran. He muttered in his heart that he still didn't know what was so good about this high school student. Qin Ran had been called out by Mu Ying. She still hadn't answered Ning Qing's call. Ning Qing could only go to the school and call Mu Ying to go to class 3.9 to find Qin Ran. There was a coffee shop in front of the school, which was quite quiet and had no private rooms. Ning Qing and Lin Wan sat by the window. "Why are you looking for me?" Qin Ran pulled the chair aside and sat with her legs crossed. She looked like she had no manners. She hasn't slept well lately, so her eyes were bloodshot and her expression cold and annoyed. Her figure was lazy and she lowered her head halfway, not looking nearly as strong as she did at the police station a few days ago. Like a hooligan. Lin Wan looked at her and frowned subconsciously. Those who would sit on the seat of the chief were usually people with inside information and who were familiar with the movements of the city. She took the coffee, drank it, and looked away. Ning Qing's eyes turned to Qin Ran's left hand. She was holding a mobile phone in her left hand and her fingers were long and smooth. Her right hand was slightly exposed and the thread gauze could be seen. Ning Qing remembered that she wrote with her left hand and was left-handed. She was relieved that her left hand was fine. "Your hands. Are you okay?" Ning Qing uneasily grasped her wallet and said. "It's okay, I won't become crippled." Qin Ran kicked the trash can beside her. Ning Qin didn't know what to say and just opened her mouth. Qin Ran ran out of patience. She frowned and was quite irritable. Is there anything else? Otherwise, I'll leave first. Ning Qin looked at Qin Ran and clutched her purse even tighter. Your injury doesn't seem to be a big problem. About Su Shen. Qin Ran leaned back, squinting at her indifferently. Ning Qin remained silent for a while. Lin Wan put the cup on the table. She looked at Qin Ran and spoke slowly as if she was on higher grounds. Qin Ran, I don't wish for Su Shen's matter to go to the courts. From February 15, 2020, coins spent on books that aren't selected will be refunded within 30 days. However, fast passes will not be refunded. The selected book will have a mark on the corner of the book cover in 30 days to indicate continuation. Thank you for your understanding.